All right, family. Welcome back. This is the Revolution Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Orris. We're talking about culture. We're talking about the memetics. We're talking about the embodiment and the crisis of meaning in 2022. I'm joined by an amazing writer, author, and gentleman that I met online through my book in collaboration with Cattle Last and Daniel Dick. He is Andrew Sweeny. He's a Canadian-born writer, editor, blogger, and YouTuber, and successful podcaster. He's also the co-editor of Parallax Magazine and the Manifesto Media Academy, which some of you may remember with my work with Manifesto and the European Men's Gathering. And he's doing coaching and meeting coaching to assist and mentor people to get into the fullness of their life. And we share a lot of the same topics. And he's also into Heidegger, Nietzsche, Jung, Tantric Buddhism. We're going to have a lot to go off of in this one, and I'm really grateful that you're here with us, Andrew.
Great to be here, Kevin.
Yeah, before we get started here, do you want to just share, in real time, something that you're grateful for or what's really exciting for you right now?
I'm grateful for my 2-year-old.
Nice.
I have a 2-year-old boy. So I'm grateful to be a dad in general.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very busy and doing all these things, and but when I'm with my little boy, I feel very alive.
I love that. Children have that ability to just bring out the life force unmitigated in us, don't they?
Indeed.
Beautiful. Well, Andrew, I came across your work, I think, through Alexander Bard and Cattle Last. I think you did a collaboration with Cadell, and he was speaking very highly of you. And then I met Owen Cox in Denmark at the European Men's Movement gathering last year. And he was mentioning you were one of the rascal poet and writers and collaborators in this kind of scene that's been called the intellectual dark web. Bard's version is intellectual deep web. And just what I would describe and include myself in to some extent of a fringe, liminal, but also deeply critical and creative group of various people online, many of which are into publishing and writing, whether it's through video or blogs or content or podcasts, and really grappling with some of the biggest issues of our time, whether it's the metaphysics, whether it's the meaning crisis, whether it's gender, culture, etc. So that's how I found you, and I'm excited we're finally here doing this thing.
Yeah. The interesting thing about all that is that we do it because we love it, right? The word amateur means to love something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's just a love of expression, of being, sometimes of combat, of a mutual creation that happens with all of these people that I know and talk to. And it's not directed towards anything that could be reified or made into institutionalized. It's a spontaneous kind of community, you could say.
Right.
Which is interesting because I'm a teacher and I noticed the difference between. Yes, and I noticed the difference between teaching in a classroom where people are there for getting a credit or something like that, and then the stuff I do at MMA, which is sort of educational, but people are there just because they want to be. There's no other particular reason. They're not in it for the money or the sex or the power.
Right.
They're just in it for itself.
Right. So this is actually one of the most powerful things I feel like that has emerged on the internet is the education, the communitas, and the emergent threads of intellectual discussion, of creative expression, and just general dialogos, or multiple interlocutors going deep into topics that couldn't really exist before. And like you're saying, it's self-selected. So different from the university, different from the ivory tower, and different from anything in academia where people, like you say, want to be there and they're actually discussing things that have great meaning and relevancy in their life, as opposed to something that could be, vague or imposed upon them. So I would love to start, Andrew, with just some of your hero's journey and backstory. It's something I always love to start with, both for my own curiosity and for context for our listeners. How did you start your journey, and what were some of the big, meaningful inflection points that got you here?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you mean by journey, what I would call the path or dharma or something like that.
Sure.
It started perhaps when I was sitting in a library at McGill University in Montreal, and I read a book by Chogyam Trungpa, and it just made my mind go black and stopped everything. And I realized that the world I was living in was inauthentic or in some kind of a way, and that there was a more authentic way to be. So I took up a lot of at that time I took up a lot of Zen meditation, and then I also got interested in Vajrayana. And so mostly because of the people I met. It's not that I sort of wanted to be a Buddhist or anything like that. It's more like the people I met inspired me, and I happened to meet people in that realm. So I did a bunch of Zen. I lived in a monastery for a year. I'd say my early life was, and I was a musician. I was playing in bands. I played guitar. I say my early life was sort of a mixture of hedonism and spirituality. So I kind of went back and forth between hedonism and spirituality. So I would spend half my time at the bar, and then the other half of my time at the Zendo. And then I would, I'd have these relationships, and then I would break up, and I'd go and live in a monastery for a year. In my early life, I think I was nomadic at heart. I couldn't stay anywhere or be in any one place. I had to explore a whole lot of different, areas, and so I was into literature and as well as Eastern spirituality and a bit of philosophy here and there. What else to say about it? And then I guess this whole podcasting thing that I got into happened when I was just kind of spontaneously blogging about things that were going on in the culture, and some people picked up my writing, and then I started talking to people like Alexander Bard, and we had a long podcast together called Sweeny versus Bard, and so I liked to, you mentioned the word dialogos, and I think this was a word that was popularized by John Vervaeke, and I've had a lot of conversations with him, and I think that that's a profound kind of practice. And I don't know if I don't know if I'm good at it, but I know I love doing it with a lot of people. So that's been my engagement, and what I like about it is that it's a way of exploring the edges of who you are and what you know. And getting new information, and the logos is this third element that arises in the dialogue between two people. John calls it the divine double, which I like very much. So it's being guided by that spirit of creation. In terms of my personality type, I've always been either a musician, a poet, a writer. There's always been a creative aspect to what I do. Although I wouldn't want to define myself as an artist, except to say that art is kind of like the art of living is what I aim towards.
I love that. And I agree, and also identify with that overarching theme. I find myself more and more every day in the art of living, just directed towards the good, the true, and the beautiful, even if it follows a really difficult path. And well, I think there's something powerful too about what you said, and I can also relate to it around having artistic tendencies, whether it be music or song or poetry, and being highly creative, but also being deeply interested in practice and education of some kind, right? Whether you're speaking or writing on topics, or doing studies and conversations. I think these two go together. And I think the great intellectuals of the past were also highly creative. And I think this was one of the things that we lost when industrialization kind of programmed education to more create, drones workers or good university professors rather than whole human beings. And I'm curious because I know you have a history in universities, and you mentioned McGill, which is also, I believe, where Jordan Peterson went to school, where he started.
Well, he went. Oh yes, he did. Yeah, that's right. He got his PhD there. That's true. Yeah.
Right. How do you find the difference between university culture and like what we might call the dialogos loving culture that we find ourselves in, of these crazy internet people?
Well, when I went to school, I always felt like I led a double life. So I wasn't really a dedicated student. I was always doing other things. I was always distracted by other things. I guess, felt like I was in a bit of a cage in terms of academia. I never felt comfortable as an academic. I don't think I am an academic, and I don't think I'll ever feel like an academic. And then after, I was playing in bands and I was a musician, and the only thing I could do to make money on the side was teach. So I've been teaching for a long time, and now I teach at university in Paris. But I would say that my teaching is a job, in order to earn my livelihood, and that's something that I enjoy. But I would say my direction would be to move as much out of the institutions as possible, and to be as on the fringe of the institutions as possible, because I don't think I would survive in the center of those institutions, because I think they're a Moloch, you could say, especially now. So I earn my bread through teaching, and then I do these other things out of curiosity and the pleasure principle, and wanting to expand and grow and experiment in different modalities of being.
100%. Yeah, I had a similar experience with academia where that's how I actually met Cadell initially. I was dead set on getting a PhD and pursuing psychology, and I just couldn't reconcile, like you said, this kind of double life where I was experiencing vast expansion in my studies in yoga and Tai Chi, and then also in plant medicine, and these modalities that were so expansive, so enriching. And then I had to somehow reconcile that with the university culture, which I never met a grad student when I was working in these labs that seemed genuinely happy or even healthy. Most of them seemed extremely stressed, chronic fatigue. Their bodies weren't signaling health. And I had a breakdown. I realized there's no way I could do it.
It's a slaughterhouse, basically. I mean, even if you have a nice university job, and I mean, that's how I kind of see it.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about how, what's happening today, and with the coronavirus, and with the fact that I was teaching, Zoom for a year, and that this accelerating breakdown of institutions, and how me and Alexander talk about exodology, about the exodus, about how getting out, right? And when you can get out, and how to get out, because you have to get out if you want to, preserve your soul in some sense. But on the other hand, if you try to get out, you'll find yourself in the desert. You'll go crazy if you don't have the ability to exist outside of those structures, which so it's terrible for a lot of people, I think, today, who are just having this sort of shock that the world that they think exists doesn't really sustain them, and they're finding themselves into be very alien territory. I think for a long time I've sort of seen all that as alien territory. So it's taken time for me to be able to sort of step out of that world, and take from it what I need, to feed my family and all that, but not identify with it.
Yes. And this is kind of the liminal lifestyle of someone straddling that border between structure and chaos, right? And this is, I think, what a lot of people find when they first leave academia or they leave corporate, which are kind of the main examples I know in the States, where a lot of the client work I've done in coaching and mentorship was with people making that transition. Because for a lot of folks, they have no framework for what it is to create their own structure and inhabit a financially stable, mentally, emotionally, physically stable set of relationships and parameters outside of what's been given by the culture. And I think with coronavirus, this has been one of the primary fronts of action, is more people have realized, like you said, sitting at home on Zoom and running their job, that wait a minute, there's a lot of different ways I can earn my bread, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and also, you know, support myself creatively and or expand, travel, and innovate what I'm doing, whether it's career or art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's all good, but a lot of people, I think, are between worlds, so it's a traumatic time. Certainly, there was a guy I know recently named Ole Bjerg who also is involved, and you might have met him at the men's group. He just got fired from his job as a professor in Copenhagen because he wouldn't, monitor his students' vaccine status. And he lost his job, but he had a good job. But what I got from him when he was talking about it was a sense of joy. It's like I got out.
Right.
And he knew that there were a lot of options for him, and that stepping out, he was prepared. He was somebody who was prepared to get out, and that he had a place to go to get out of. He had enough trust in himself and enough spiritual grounding that he could step out of these old dead structures and into the new world. So he had a really big sense of joy in stepping out of that system, which I found kind of inspiring. And I think more and more people are going to do that and have to do that, and that's perhaps the blessing of this pandemic.
100%. I mean, this to me is the greatest blessing of it. And, not to minimize the suffering it's also caused, certainly for people of lower economic status, like just the ridiculous amount of restrictions and difficulty that it's created. And, for me, like this was, I was graduating university in 2012. And so back then it was odious to me and unbearable to exist in those structures then. And I found that out the hard way. Now, and I was a highly sensitive, empathic, whatever you want to call a person, whatever label. And now I see more and more people that maybe weren't as sensitized finding that same limit of this is unacceptable, unbearable, whether it's corporate or university. And to me, I'm applauding, I'm celebrating. Now, many are unprepared, unlike your friend here you're mentioning, which, I think those that have been slowly preparing their lifeboat or slowly preparing their new vessel to jump ship from these, sinking Titanics, if you will, they're going to do the best, especially if they're keen on entrepreneurship. I think the biggest ship right now that's taking up the greatest talent and actually exploding faster than anything since the beginning of the internet is Web3 and the decentralized various platforms that are contained within blockchain. But also academically, I think, when Peterson and Weinstein and Rogan and these guys started being labeled the intellectual dark web guys, and the explosion on Substack and on YouTube and podcasts that we've witnessed over the last 10-ish years, really less 5 years, is happening for the academic space. And so there's an amazing amount of innovation happening that I would describe as sort of a pre, call it an echo of the Enlightenment or the Renaissance of, the rascals are gathering and creating these fringe citadels outside of the ivory towers that are actually becoming popularized and actually creating a lot of meaning and framing for the new folks that are realizing and waking up to, oh shit, my university job, my corporate job has become unbearable since coronavirus.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to Zach Stein. I think it was a couple nights ago. He was on our MMA, and he was talking about um, how total the sort of breakdown right now is in terms of teacherly authority, in terms of structures, in terms of places you find yourself in. And he was saying, and I agree that the places that are the most reliable are these kind of wisdom schools that are out in the desert somewhere. There obviously can be unreliable ones as well. Are we? I can't. I think you've frozen on me, Kevin. Are you
Yeah,
still there?
I can hear you if you can hear me. I think.
I can hear you. Just your face was frozen, so I was wondering if you were
Okay.
still there.
Yeah, I'm still here.
So, yeah. So it's the best of times and the worst of times in a sense.
Sure.
And there's incredible. It's the best time really to dig deep down into yourself and do spiritual practice, because there's nothing out there in the in the culture. I mean, the culture is, everything is happening in another space other than the culture. The culture is has become almost completely a simulacrum, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
then an authentic person, whoever they were called, the deep web people or whatever, would people are compelled by that, because human beings will always long for something authentic, and
right.
find those places to be unlivable.
Right. Well, and this I think is the greatest asset of these wisdom schools that you're talking about, is the craving for authenticity is so high that people are finally willing to look outside legacy media institutions and these controlled sources of information. I mean, a lot of this stuff, and I assume you're familiar with some of his work, was in Marshall McLuhan, 60 years
Mm-hmm.
ago.
Yeah.
And he elaborated so much of this back then, when radio and television were extremely dominant, and these methods were just getting started, right? I mean, the Cultural Revolution in the 60s introduced some rebel radio, some rogue magazines, and obviously the music was a big medium of change and communication. But we're at a level now where the absurdity of, like, for example, this whole thing with Joe Rogan right now. CNN has 10x less attention and viewership than Joe Rogan, an independent, regular bro who's podcasting. And they're scapegoating and trying to character assassinate him, which to me just reveals the desperation and the sad late stage of their development, that they're even willing to go after him like that. And so, this is an amazing moment for the podcaster, for the blogger, for the content creator who's in these wisdom schools and is actually interested in being authentic, even if it's unpopular.
Well, it's interesting, this whole business of scapegoat mechanism, and we've been talking about that a lot in MMA. We did a whole month about René Girard and this, this sort of spontaneous mobs that arise that want to kill the scapegoat. But over time, Girard's theory is that the scapegoat mechanisms becomes more and more transparent. And and then what happens is the scapegoats are actually the winners, strangely enough, right? Like everybody went after Jordan Peterson, like he was being set up to be the number one scapegoat. And you can agree with him or disagree with him, but he wasn't a Nazi by any means. And the more that people tried to scapegoat him, the more he was successful in spreading another kind of message of long form, depth, interesting conversations with people, etc., etc. So I think that's probably happening to Joe, is that they go after him to scapegoat him, but even the scapegoat mechanism has become so transparent and so ridiculous that nobody believes it. It's happening in Canada, actually. I'm from Ottawa, actually. I live in France now, but but it's kind of hilarious because when I see the messaging about what's going on there, it's people who are supposed to be leftist Marxists attacking the working class and calling them, deplorables, whereas actually a genuine proletariat revolution is going on. Which is hilarious. People who drive trucks, and I have the same. I have this weird thing in the culture today, is like the rednecks, are the hippies, and the hippies are the rednecks, and
right.
We're living in this land of inversion, of this upside down world, this kind of clown world where the whole because all of the structures, right? It's no wonder, because CNN is an old structure, and university education are old structures, and journalism is an old structure. These are 20th century mechanisms,
right.
or 20th century media and educational and medical paradigms which have exhausted their use, and there's a new paradigm being developed, but nobody knows what it is yet. But we only know that those paradigms are over, in a sense, even though they continue to function as this kind of simulacrum.
Right. Well, you mentioned something, and shout out to the truckers in Ottawa. I think the whole world is supporting them. The sane parts of humanity, which is most of humanity, is supporting them. And the absurdity of the scapegoating is at a level where it's barely effective. And like you're saying, It actually has the opposite effect. They're getting free media attention, and they're living rent-free in everyone's heads on every screen right now, because the Canadian media has the audacity to call them white supremacists, or call this an occupation or an invasion. It's just, we've reached peak absurdity in the simulation, as you're saying.
Yeah.
Like this,
and I've never been a Marxist, but I'm starting to think that that it is actually the working people who don't give a fuck, who are not trapped by these mechanisms, that actually rise up from the depth and show people the real.
And I've been a similar. I'm certainly not anti-Marxist, but I was very skeptical of these beliefs when they were being shared to me in university, and also when I've met people that are very left leaning. I think there's a lot of wisdom in it. Obviously, as with any dogma, belief system, or theory, if you go all in on it, you kind of turn into a fool or some kind of jester character. And something else you mentioned that I think is probably one of the most fascinating things is, I was raised, my parents' generation was all about the left supporting free speech, right?
Yeah, me too. Because I remember the 90s, the left was kind of a live and let live,
right,
a movement there, we, in the arts worlds, we do radical shit, and it wasn't this constant policing of people's behaviors, and kind of shrill, naive activism.
right.
It was the left people were the guys marching on Washington. Now it's the so-called deplorables who are facing the police. So what do we think of that? What do we think as, like, when, like me, I was raised in very progressive kind of milieu, and then Donald Trump gets elected, and then he's running on a platform in the United States about giving people free choice about vaccines. So have I become suddenly a Donald Trump supporter?
Right.
Yeah, maybe. It's just hilarious, the whole thing, right?
It's insane and really funny at the same time. And I think there's health in finding the humor in it, and playing with the energy at the same time of being hyper discerning and aware with it. Because, I think the trap is to fall for any number of the, call them psyops or call them these kind of honeypots that are in these headlines and these sound bites that are flooding our media feeds around choose a side, right? Whether it's with the shot or whether it's politically or whether it's, intellectually. I just have seen more people, like, I'm sure you can relate, Andrew, like more people I've known for years, people I've done deep work with. Like I'm talking about ceremonies or intense retreats, various forms of relating and work, become radicalized in the last 2 years than I've ever seen in my, I've been here 32 years on the planet, but I was just shocked. It's almost like people's masks are being either removed or placed on as fast as possible. And I'm talking about persona, I'm talking about possession by ideology, and obviously physical masks too. But
well, that's what apocalypse means. It means to reveal what is the case. So these are apocalyptic times, and what is being revealed is what's underneath the mask, which is terrifying. Which is genuinely terrifying.
Yes, and
it'd be much more easier to join a cult or to join a political party, which is more or less the same thing as a cult. I mean, if you're left wing, you're in a cult, and if you're right wing, you're in a cult. So if you're in one of these groups, you're not thinking, you're not engaging with reality. You're just running for safety.
Right. Well, in some sense, you're running to mommy or daddy to make the bad, discomfort go away. Because the paradox and the discomfort of like contradiction is peaking. It's peaking for many areas of the culture. And I think a lot of
well
people,
said. Yeah.
They can't. And I certainly have had my own struggles with this. Like I'm not immune to this at all. But I see people that, like, for example, the born again Christian phenomenon. I've seen people that have done hundreds of ayahuasca ceremonies or have been the most, energy healing Kundalini kind of quantum physics thinker. And then they announce they've returned to the power of Jesus and he'll actually save them. And then what's more concerning is now they're telling all their friends that they need to be saved now. And, people I would never have bet on that have done this shockingly have in the last 2 years. And like what you're saying, it's
because it's the same thing, right? Is the counterculture, when it goes to its extreme, is just after a bunch of experiences. It's not after truth. And then it could be that experience or another experience. Could be an ayahuasca experience or a born again Christian experience. It's the same thing, just in a different outfit. So I don't have too much faith in the counterculture. I think I have faith in people who are spiritually grounded.
Mm-hmm.
I think the counterculture is as mad as the rest of the culture.
Certainly.
And especially now, sure. Like so if you're in the counterculture, you're just angry at mommy or daddy, and if you're in the status quo, you're just protecting mommy or daddy. But you still haven't woke up to the real yet. And you could take 1 million ayahuasca ceremonies, and that could be just more and more experiences.
Sure. Yeah, well said. I want to pivot here, Andrew, and ask you about, what is your read on the territory right now? Because I feel like there is a big shift. Obviously, 2020 was just like, what the fuck's happening? 2021 is like, maybe it'll stop. It intensified. Now we're at somewhat of a crossroads where I feel like, everything with the virus is set to shift right now.
Yeah, it's about to shift again.
Right. We have a lot of bursts of creativity in various industries, whether you take the intellectual deep web kind of, wisdom schools we're talking about, and or financially, there's some big moves happening, and or just culturally in general. I feel like more people are speaking out now and having more courage to be like, hey, like this is bullshit, especially small business owners, especially the working class, and certainly the people that, we're in our, bubble with on these online platforms. I do feel a big shift in the winds, and I'm curious, like, what are you tracking most right now, or what are you excited about?
Well, what I'm noticing is that the master narrative is shifting a little bit, and so a few months ago, you were a deplorable person if you would even suggest that the vaccines might be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And now people are like, what if vaccines are, kind of dangerous? So the same people who were saying, that vaccines, if you don't take the vaccines, you're a bad person, are going to be saying the opposite. So the master narrative is going to shift. Yeah, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but probably again, this the truckers, and I feel happy about the truckers in my hometown. Although I think probably the people I know in Ottawa don't, but because they consider all these people from Alberta to be rednecks, deplorables, Trump supporters,
Sure.
and because it's kind of a liberal place. So I feel happy about that, and I feel happy about my friend Ole who lost his job and is gleefully moving into a new realm, and I feel happy about how all the creativity that's happening on the fringes. I think again the Exodus myth says it all to me. It's like there's some people who are in Egypt and they're going to stay in Egypt, and you just got to go up the mountain, and then you got to go down the mountain, and then you're in the desert, and then the desert is a rough place, but you got to keep going through the desert. So we're in times we're in apocalyptic times where now the plagues of locusts are going to come, and I guess literally that is Corona. So I think the faith is in the small, not in the big. The small movements of people, the small groups of people who are moving towards the promised land, metaphorically speaking. I'm not being religious here. I'm just using that as a metaphor. So get out if you can, and but be prepared, because if you're not prepared, then it could be way worse. Getting out of Egypt could be mental illness if you're not prepared, if you're not ready for the desert and crossing the desert.
Sure. I mean, that's wise words. Like, essentially, the best model I've found, which I've found in various places in the world, and on the internet connection tip too, is gather with small groups of like-minded people. Don't have to have the same narrative or beliefs, but share certain principles of curiosity, of discussion, of dialogos, of loving wisdom, loving alignment and truth and authenticity. And basically, these are the people you want to do business with. These are the people you want to have a relationship with. These are the people that you want to build with. And this doesn't mean living off grid and loincloths, growing fruit, although I know people that are interested in that. It also doesn't mean, joining the front lines of the nearest protest, although a lot of people are doing that. I think more and more self-sufficiency and sovereignty, although they get kicked around a lot as buzzwords, is essential. And this is how you, as you're saying, Andrew, you prepare for the desert and successfully navigate it. And I think most people on this planet, because there's still a lot of folks living on less than $1 a day, relatively speaking. So most people are still navigating the scarcity around money and wealth and resources in this time. Because let's be honest, with the whole jab and getting your paperwork, what's been held up as the carrot or the stick? It's your job. And a lot of folks have been economically pressured into these various, Moloch runs of what's happening on a systems level, right? On an institution level. So a lot of folks, I think, are hungry. You don't have to become a full-blown entrepreneur, but they're hungry to freelance, to work remote. They're hungry to join aligned companies. They're hungry to create their own enterprises, even if like you're teaching on the side, earning your bread, and yet you're running, your own magazine, podcast, you're writing books and blogs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not everybody could sustain that kind of a lifestyle, and people need jobs. And I don't want to sound like because people, there's not everybody is creative.
Sure.
Not everybody has a creative personality, or is a educational entrepreneur, or as a writer, or as a, ordinary people are just wanting to have a good ordinary life.
Right.
So that's all well and good. What do I want to say is it's just that I think in terms of let's say the spiritual practice that fundamentally spiritual practice is not about circumstance. So yes, there's all these things happening in the world, but there's always the potential to let's say wake up in the morning and meditate and start an entirely new day. Like every day is a new experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So in one way we can talk about cultural trends and what's going on in the world, and then in one way there's this perennial thing where we can where we need to think about what we put our attention on in every moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would aspire to be putting my attention on what is the most divine in every moment. That would be the aspiration, which doesn't depend on circumstance.
Right. I think that's a good thing to point out for sure. And I mean, this is something I've taught in courses, and I think is essential, is some kind of routine or practice, as you're saying, some kind of discipline. It can be the most simple thing, a few minutes a day, but that is what I think is the biggest benchmark of who has grown and in measurable ways during this pandemic and everything it brought, and those who kind of like fell into patterns or got spiraled into these various cults, as you were mentioning earlier. If you align with that every day, and if you really are approaching life with an open heart and mind, and you have something to build your energy and build your confidence and an optimistic future, you're going to be fine. And I think a lot of people actually are doing way better than fine, because more people now than ever. And yes, you're right. Not everybody's creative. Not everybody's going to be doing stuff like we're doing. But the ones that have that potential, I really would encourage them to run, jump, and go for it. Because there's actually never been a better time to start. That's the beauty of a crisis or the apocalypse, right? As everything's being revealed, there's actually a great opportunity for the deviants, the artists, the mutants, the poets, the thinkers, the philosophers to step forward, because the institution's on shaky ground. So we have all these cracks in the armor of Babylon, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's true. I have a little bit of a break on that. Is that the shamanistic thing, is also a dangerous thing. So
Certainly.
So if you're into danger, if you're a gambler of some point, I would say agree. If you're not, I would say have as good a life as possible. And in practice sutric virtue, compassion, and love as best you can, in whatever circumstance you happen to be in.
Yeah, for sure. Well said. There's a lot to be said for just striving to have a beautiful, simple life for you and your family. And I think most people do want that. Even the ones that are the shamanoid kind of mutants still ultimately come back to that, right? That's the hero's journey, returning home. I guess the last question I want to ask.
The thing about the hero's journey is there's different kinds of heroes, right? We tend to have a caricature of what the hero is. Like it's kind of a masculine figure, and he kind of has a sphere, and he goes out and kills a dragon and that kind of thing. But but like, let's say the hero is a mother, the hero is also a truck driver, the hero is there's heroes on different, there's the terrain of heroicism, and some people are heroes of the desert, some people are heroes of the mountain, some people are, there's a different, let's say, niche for there's heroicism that's possible in all of the niches. You could be a waitress who's a hero, you could be a philosopher who's a hero, you could be a stripper who's a hero. So I'd say, like, I'd like to expand the definition of the hero's myth out of this sort of like King Arthur Knight's world, and bring it into this ordinary heroicism, like the hero of a mother, single mother, for example.
Yeah, I love that. I think, certainly it's been dramatized, and I think Hollywood has a lot to do with that. Also literature, which is amazing, the like high heroic story that's very archetypal. But you're absolutely right. And this is my understanding of the word heros in Greek, is a guardian of the village, or a guardian of a principle or virtue, which the village, the community, is the waitress, is the truck driver, is the single mother, who actually may be the biggest heroes in that scene. So certainly everyone has to find their own way to it. All it's needed to be in a heroic state of mind or being is to give all of oneself and actually live fully in alignment and manifest the better parts of our nature, as you're saying, having compassion for others and the self, seeking to be of service, and also, putting love and not fear at the center of the motivation of your actions as best you can, knowing that you'll fuck up often.
And the opposite of being a hero is being a coward. And I think being a coward is being a puppet of whatever ideological fashion is like, appears in that moment, and then just repeating things that are fed to you on the algorithm, and becoming what Gurdjieff called a mechanical man.
Sure.
The hero is the person who has there's a sparkle, there's something that shines through that mechanical, that dense mechanical darkness that is much of the human realm.
Certainly. Yeah. The challenge with 2022 I see is, to resist the automaton, resist the automatic, the controlled by algorithms kind of NPC syndrome that I think a lot of people are recognizing gladly. They're recognizing it and speaking
resist out. And what my friend David Smith says, opt out. You don't have to resist all the time. You can just opt out. You can just not do something.
Right.
It's even easier.
That's where the power is if you stop giving time, energy, money, attention to a lot of these things, they have no hold on you or your friends or family.
Yeah.
That could be
and the more you make small acts of what you would call heroicism, the more you do that, the more better you feel. And the more you're able to, the more you're able to see the world, as a place of beauty and goodness, and not just a place of imprisonment or.
Yeah, I love that. And that's non-trivial. Feeling good and seeing the world in a light of the good it has to offer and the evolution, I think is extremely valuable. Maybe the most valuable thing you can have in a tiny micro moment of the day, right? Just doing your dharma. So yeah, lots of good places to jump off from here, Andrew. And as we wind down here, I'd love for you to share with viewers that are watching live, and also who is going to listen to this later, where they can find you and what is on your menu right now for how people can get involved.
Well, all of my blogging is on a magazine I do with a guy named Tom Marmark called Parallax. So we have a lot of stuff up there, a lot of interviews and discussions and roundtables and different experimental kind of modes of media. And also on Wednesday night, I have a men's group, which is kind of like a monastic study group in the sense that they're all men, because it's from the monastic, it's from the Manifesto Core, which is an online men's network. And we're talking about people like Marshall McLuhan, René Girard. We're talking, it's kind of like intellectual men's work, you could say. I do that with a guy named Owen Cox and Eskel, and we've created a kind of community where we can discuss these kind of let's say luminary figures and intellectuals and spiritual people, and that's every Wednesday night. So there's the MMA every Wednesday night. There's the blogging and the magazine, and there's the Sweeny versus Bard podcast, and there's all my discussions with John Vervaeke and guys like John Vervaeke and Zach Stein, and so there's a rich library of material that's starting to build up. And I guess that's where you could find my online kind of work. Yeah. Oh, I forgot something. Yes, I have a book club every Sunday night where I study non-dual spiritual texts, texts from the Vajrayana tradition, text from Zen, text from Sufism and Advaita, and all of the non-dual traditions. We sit around and read texts and have discussions, and that's totally free, and you can come on Sunday nights. So there you go.
Amazing. Lots of ways to get involved. We'll have those links, everything in the show notes on the podcast. And
yeah, and it's all about building community.
That's right.
As you well know in your work. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, brilliant. Go and follow Mr. Andrew Sweeny, y'all, and check out Parallax, his amazing magazine. And also, I can also speak very highly of Manifesto Core and the work that Paul and the whole Manifesto crew is putting out there. Very valuable if you are looking for a men's group, if you're looking for community and you're not finding it in the physical. Obviously, you can find it in the digital, and then that'll lead to the physical ideally. So it's amazing to dialogue with you, Andrew. It's very well met. And I look forward to seeing you in person in Europe, perhaps later this year.
Yeah, I mean, I was supposed to have been at the Manifesto men's, I go every summer, but I couldn't because of a health problem. So I should have been there to meet you last summer. Hopefully I can make it this year if you're going to be there. But
yeah, my plan is to be there with the co-authors. Shout out to Cadell and Daniel. And yeah, it's going to be good to be in those European places, hopefully that are even more free than they are right now. So,
right. Well, yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot for inviting me to talk.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. If you've enjoyed this, tag somebody that you think would benefit from it. Share this with friends and family. And no matter what you do, keep manifesting the heroic potential within you and living your best life. That's what we're out here doing in 2022. Thank y'all so much. See you very soon.